She had no idea what was about to happen. To anyone outside Camilla's life, a fictitious name to protect her identity, seemed completely normal. A 17-year-old girl, studious, reserved, with a seemingly healthy relationship with her parents and close friends. But inside that house there was something growing silently, like a crack hidden behind the wall. The first signs were almost invisible. An unlocked door when she came home from school, her mother's cell phone constantly out of reach, and that strange look from her father, as if he knew something she didn't. Camilla felt it, but she didn't understand it. The uncomfortable feeling of being watched had no form or justification, and since no one around her seemed to notice anything wrong, she tried to ignore it too. But the more she ignored it, the worse it got. One night she woke up to footsteps in the hallway, and for a moment she was sure someone was standing at the door of her room. The sound disappeared. When she asked her parents, they said it was just a dream, and she wanted to believe it. But that was her first mistake, because she would only discover the truth when it was too late, and what came next would reveal a story so disturbing that it would shock even the most experienced investigators. She didn't know, not at that moment. The world still seemed stable, the walls of the house were still standing, and the daily routine still offered that false sense of security. Camilla believed she was living an ordinary life. School in the morning, family lunch, studying in the afternoon, cell phone until bedtime. Nothing screamed danger. Nothing suggested tragedy. But there was something there, an uncomfortable silence, as if the house held secrets that no one dared to name. The first time she felt something was wrong was when she came home from school and found the back door ajar. Her mother said she had left in a hurry. Maybe she had forgotten to lock it, but Camilla knew that was strange. That never happened. From that day on, other little things began to accumulate. Her younger brother began to have constant nightmares, always mumbling things that he himself couldn't remember later. Her mother started locking her own room during the day. Her father, who used to make jokes during dinner, now barely touched his food, staring into space. Camilla wasn't naive, but I still had no idea that I was living inside a countdown. She tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was pressure at school, maybe problems in her parents' marriage, maybe just paranoia. But as the days went by, reality seemed to distort. She noticed that some messages on her cell phone were being deleted before she could even read them. She asked her mother if she had touched the device, but her answer came back dry. Why would I do that? After that, the atmosphere in the house became more tense. Certain conversations would stop when she entered the room. The doors started to close more tightly. It was as if something was about to happen, but no one had the courage to say anything. Until one night, she heard a noise in the basement. It was almost 2 in the morning. Her instinct told her not to go there, but curiosity got the better of her. When she opened the basement door, she saw her father sitting in the dark, alone, motionless. She called out to him. He didn't answer. When she finally turned his face, she realized that he was crying. But what she saw in his eyes at that moment wasn't pain. It was fear. Camilla went upstairs without saying anything else. And it was at that moment that he understood that the danger did not come from outside. The next day, she decided to investigate. She hid her father's cell phone while he was taking a shower. She discovered that there were messages exchanged with unknown numbers, all deleted after sending. But one name in particular caught her attention. Marina. She had never heard that name at home. Never. And the content of the messages she managed to recover with a recovery app was more than suspicious. Coded conversations, mentions of she doesn't know yet, and everything needs to seem natural. Camilla didn't sleep that night. In the morning, her mother was already waiting for her in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair as if she were anticipating a confession. When Camilla sat down, the silence was unbearable. Her mother simply said, "You've been poking around where you shouldn't have." Camilla froze, but her mother continued in an even colder tone, "Don't do that again." No explanation, no shouting, just a threat disguised as advice. It was the confirmation she needed. Something very wrong was happening in that house, and she was alone. The following days were a game of emotional survival. Camilla began to pretend to be normal while she searched for answers. At school, she researched disappearances in the region, old cases of domestic violence, names that could be related to Marina. He discovered a news story from 5 years ago, a missing woman who had an extramarital affair with a married man. The case was closed due to lack of evidence. The husband's name was never revealed in the article, but the city mentioned was the same. Camilla began to believe that Marina could be that woman. And if so, why was that name still haunting her family? It was then that he decided to go further. He broke into his father's office, something that was strictly forbidden. He rummaged through old papers, hidden folders, and at the bottom of a drawer he found a photo. It was a woman, long hair, light eyes, smiling next to her father. Behind the photo, a date and one word: always. His blood ran cold. That night she dreamed that she woke up and saw that woman sitting on the edge of her bed. Whether it was a dream or not, when she woke up, there was a note under her pillow. "You don't understand what's happening." The handwriting was her mother's. From that moment on, she began to be certain that her life was in danger. She tried to talk to her grandmother, but before she could say anything, her father interrupted her, who appeared in the living room with a tone that was too casual. That was the last straw. She needed to get out of there, seek help. But before she could execute any plan, the last piece of the puzzle came. While rummaging through a box of old clothes in the attic, she found a letter. It was from Marina, addressed to Camilla's mother. The handwriting was shaky, as if written in desperation. It said disconnected sentences, but one of them stuck in the girl's mind. "You promised that this would end," but he didn't stop. The letter had no date, no ending. And in that moment, everything made sense. Marina wasn't just a past affair. She was a shadow that still haunted that house. Something that hadn't been resolved. Something that was about to explode again. Camilla decided to record everything. Cell phone in her pocket, camera on, full recording. She needed proof. She left the recording running for 2 days. On the second day, she caught a conversation between her parents. They were in their room. Her father's voice said, "She's starting to understand." And her mother's voice replied, "Then we have to act soon." Nothing else was said, but that was enough. Camilla ran to her room, backed up the recordings, and hid everything on a secret drive. She was determined to leave. But the next morning, she didn't wake up in her bed. When she opened her eyes, everything was dark. Camilla felt a strange weight on her head, as if she had been pulled out of a deep dream, but she couldn't remember how she had fallen asleep. She was lying on an old mattress in a room she didn't recognize. The walls were made of raw concrete, with no windows, and the air smelled of mold. The silence was absolute, except for the constant dripping coming from somewhere behind her. She tried to get up, but her wrists were tied too tightly. Her mind raced, trying to understand. Was it a kidnapping? A nightmare? Someone from school? The answer was crueler than any theory she could imagine. Little by little, the events of the last few days began to come back. The deleted messages, the veiled threat from her mother, the recorded conversation. And then she realized it wasn't a kidnapping by strangers. It was something planned, something orchestrated inside her own house. And worst of all, no one outside had any idea that she was in danger. Hours passed, maybe days. There was no clock. There was no sun. Every now and then, a tray with food would appear near the door. She never saw who left it. The only thing she heard was a muffled voice that said, always from the other side of the wall, "You need to understand." Understand what? The truth? The secret? The reason why her own family had decided to lock her up as a criminal? Desperation was beginning to take over, but Camilla was strong. She had learned not to trust appearances and knew that panic was the enemy of survival. At the first opportunity, she used a loose edge of the mattress to tear part of the fabric and try to cut the restraints. After long minutes of silent effort, she managed to free her wrists. Her legs were free. Her heart was beating fast. She needed to escape. But how? The door was locked. The ceiling was too high. Time was her greatest enemy. In a corner of the wall, there was a small ventilation opening. It wasn't big, but maybe it was enough to get through. She forced the grate with all her strength until it came loose, leaving a tight space through which she crawled, scratching herself on the edges, her chest almost crushed against the concrete. On the other side, a narrow, dark hallway with no sign of an exit. She advanced without making a sound, guided only by the dim light coming from a distant point. As she got closer, she realized something unbelievable. She was in the basement of her own house. What she imagined to be an external captivity, an isolated prison, was, in fact, an improvised underground room inside the home where she grew up. The feeling of betrayal was overwhelming, but there was still a chance. She had to get out of there before anyone noticed her escape. She climbed the stairs carefully without making a sound, holding her breath. When she reached the basement door, she heard voices. It was her mother, talking on the phone. The conversation was quick, to the point. "She'll understand. It's just a matter of time. We just can't let the others find out." Camilla waited until her mother walked away. She opened the door slowly, going straight into the living room. Nothing had changed. The couch was in place, the pictures on the walls, everything was exactly as it had been before. The contrast between the horror of the basement and the normality of the house was unbearable. She ran to her bedroom, grabbed her cell phone hidden inside the lamp, and ran out into the street through the back. She was free, but for how long? She called the only person she still trusted, a former teacher who lived 2 cities away. She asked for help, told them only part of what had happened, and was told to go straight to the police station. There, the story she told seemed too absurd even for the police. But the desperation in her voice, the scratches on her body, and the recordings on her cell phone were enough to convince them to investigate. Hours later, a police car was sent to her parents' house. Camilla waited, sitting at the police station, trying to understand how everything had gotten to this point. She remembered birthdays, family trips, old laughs. It was hard to fit these memories into the same space where she had been held captive. When the police returned, the look on their faces said it all. They had found the room in the basement. They had listened to the recordings. They had opened an investigation, but they had not been able to arrest anyone. The father had disappeared. The mother claimed to be in a state of shock, saying that it was all her daughter's invention, the result of a mental breakdown. And the most disturbing thing, the police could not prove that Camilla had not locked herself there alone. There were no cameras. There were no witnesses, only her word against her mother's. Camilla was sent to a temporary shelter while the investigation continued. There she began to write down everything she remembered, every sign, every detail. She reviewed the recordings, searched through old computer files, and looked for any connection to Marina. And it was on an old forum that she found something that would change everything. An anonymous profile reported years ago that they had seen a woman who looked like Marina being forcibly taken by a man on a nearby road. The physical description matched that of Camilla's father. The profile was never traced, but that raised a new suspicion. Had Marina never disappeared on her own? Had she been silenced? Could Camilla's family be connected to something much bigger? Something that involved old secrets and a pact of silence that was now beginning to crumble? The press discovered the case, and quickly, the news began to spread the story of the daughter who accused her parents of false imprisonment and links to an unsolved disappearance. Society was divided. Some believed her, others thought it was all just a juvenile delusion. But the investigators knew that something was strange. The behavior of the parents, the mother's coldness, the father's sudden disappearance, everything indicated that this was just the surface of something deeper. And then a clue emerged. A bank account in the mother's name had received regular deposits for years, coming from a shell company registered in Marina's name. But Marina had disappeared. How could a company in her name remain active? Camilla was called back to the police station to give more details. While she waited, she saw a police officer enter the room with an envelope in his hands. Inside were old photos, security camera footage, and a birth certificate. But the name wasn't hers. It belonged to a girl named Isadora. Her mother was Marina. Her father was unnamed. The date matched Camilla's birth year. She read the paper and felt the ground disappear from her. Could she not be the daughter of the parent she had always known? Could her entire life have been built on a lie? Questions piled up. The pain was unbearable, and the most disturbing thing was knowing that this wasn't the end yet. She stared at the paper as if it could disprove what was written, as if some hidden line would reveal that it was all just a documentation error. But the name was there, printed clearly, and next to the word mother, it read, Marina Duarte. The same woman from the photo hidden in her father's office. The same woman whose disappearance had been filed away without a solution. That certificate was not just a record. It was a revelation that changed everything Camilla believed about herself. And suddenly the pieces that had seemed loose began to fit together. The whispered conversations between her parents, her mother's cold behavior, the way her father watched her with a mixture of guilt and fear. She was not that woman's biological daughter, and perhaps she had never been the daughter of the man who disappeared after the report. That explained the distance, the vague answers about her birth, the fact that she had never seen a photo of herself as a baby. She had always been told that the albums had been lost in a flood, a flimsy excuse that now sounded like a lie carefully constructed to keep the truth hidden. Camilla returned to the shelter without saying a word. She sat on her bed for hours, reliving every moment of her childhood looking for signs that something had always been wrong. And they were there. The stories that didn't make sense, the places she could never go, the questions about her past that were always being deflected. Now, everything seemed to have been scripted to keep her in a bubble of misinformation. But why? What was the reason for hiding her true identity? What happened to Marina? And most importantly, why would someone go to such lengths to create a new life narrative for her? The next day, she returned to the police station determined to find out more. Investigators said they were trying to track down Marina's relatives. They discovered that she had worked as a nurse at a psychiatric hospital, and that there were records of a call for help made by her a few days before she disappeared. In the report, Marina said that she was being followed, that someone had broken into her home, and that she feared for her newborn daughter. The complaint was never investigated thoroughly. 2 days later, she disappeared without a trace. The strongest theory was that Marina had been the victim of a silent kidnapping, possibly planned by someone close to her, someone who wanted to take the child. And if this theory were true, it meant that Camilla had spent her entire life alongside those responsible for her biological mother's disappearance. This was more than just a family drama. It was a crime, and a very dark one at that. The search intensified. The police requested warrants to search properties linked to the family, including a remote farm that belonged to the parents of Camilla's supposed father. There they found burned documents, children's clothes buried in plastic bags, and most frighteningly, an identity card of Marina's with a photo disfigured by time, partially destroyed by the fire, but still recognizable. This made it clear that someone had tried to erase any trace of her. But why keep Camilla alive? Why raise her as a daughter, inside the same house where silence had swallowed her mother? The hypothesis put forward by the investigators was disturbing. They believed that the woman Camilla had always called her mother could have been an accomplice, or even the mastermind behind the original crime, that she had decided to raise the daughter of the woman she hated as if she were her own, in a twisted attempt at control or even revenge, a way of keeping the memory alive just to manipulate her. This theory still lacked concrete evidence, but it made sense given the cold and calculating behavior she had demonstrated since the beginning of the case. When confronted by the police, the woman was unfazed. She denied everything, said that the documents had been planted, that the girl suffered from delusions induced by post-traumatic stress, but she did not cry. She showed no affection. She simply insisted that Camilla needed urgent treatment and that it was all just a dangerous fantasy. Meanwhile, Camilla had access to confidential files from the investigation, and in them she found another clue, an address. It belonged to a house where Marina had lived temporarily. A few months before her disappearance, she and a police officer went to the location. The building was abandoned, surrounded by tall weeds, broken windows, and a door hanging on one side. Inside, there were signs that someone had left in a hurry. Furniture overturned, clothes scattered, books on the floor. But amidst the chaos, something caught her attention. An old photo album hidden under a loose floorboard. In it, there were dozens of photos of Marina holding a baby in her arms. It was Camilla. The resemblance was undeniable. The same expression in her eyes, the same smile. There was no doubt that woman was her mother, and that place had been her home, even if only for a short time. The photos were taken for expert analysis and authenticated. They were proof of a biological and emotional bond. Marina existed, took care of Camilla, and had her daughter ripped from her arms by someone who until then had still been unpunished. With that, the story gained national repercussion. The case was officially reopened as a kidnapping and possible murder. Witnesses began to appear. A neighbor of Marina's old house said that she once saw a black car parked at the door and heard screams. The model of the car matched the one Camilla's father used at the time. Another witness, a former employee of the hospital where Marina worked, said that she had told him, days before she disappeared, that she feared being followed by a man who said he was a friend of the family. The police began to piece together the puzzle. The father's name appeared in Marina's cell phone call logs. He had called her dozens of times in the days leading up to her disappearance. The final connection lasted only 3 minutes. After that, complete silence. Camilla watched everything in silence. Even surrounded by police officers, social workers, lawyers, and journalists, she felt alone. It was as if she were living 2 parallel lives. One, that of the girl who discovered she was the victim of a cruel plot, The other, that of the woman who had to deal with the total absence of her true identity. She no longer knew who she was. Everything she believed about herself had been deconstructed. And the question that tormented her the most was the simplest of all. Why? Why would someone do this? Not just the act of taking a child from its mother, but the continuous effort to hide the truth for so many years. The answer was close, but she knew that, when it came, it would not bring peace. Shedding light on certain secrets meant awakening monsters that had slept for too long. Time became a subtle enemy. As the days went by, the tension grew. Camilla no longer trusted anyone but herself. Even under the protection of the authorities, she felt that the answers were always one step ahead, as if each truth discovered made room for a new layer of lies. The investigation delved deeper into old documents, forgotten testimonies, and clues that, until then, no one had had the courage or interest to follow. Amidst this tangle of files and reports, a name that had remained hidden until then emerged: Jonas. The name appeared in a letter written by Marina and filed as worthless evidence found in the old abandoned house. The letter said, "Jonas knows, but he is afraid. If he disappears, know that it is because of what he saw." This sentence reactivated a blind spot in the timeline. Who was Jonas? Why would he be a key player? And most importantly, was he still alive? The police located two men with that name who had connections with Marina. One of them was a co-worker at the hospital. The other was a neighbor of the house where she had temporarily lived. The co-worker had died 4 years ago, but the neighbor was still alive, living in a nearby town, isolated, with no family. When the investigators reached him, they found a frightened, reclusive man, and initially resistant. But when he heard Marina's name, his face turned pale. He asked to speak to Camilla directly. During the meeting, his voice trembled, as if he were about to open wounds that had been buried for too long. He said that at the time of her disappearance, he saw Marina being dragged by force into a car by two men, while she screamed her daughter's name. He tried to report it, but received threats. That night, his house was broken into, and he decided to keep quiet. Since then, he has lived in fear, hoping that the truth would never come out. Jonas's words not only confirmed the kidnapping theory, but also suggested that more than one person was involved. It was not an isolated act. It was something planned, executed with coolness, and with resources. After this statement, the case took a new direction. The police began investigating people with financial or professional ties to Camilla's father at the time. They discovered that he was an informal partner of an influential businessman who owned private clinics and had a history of irregularities. This man, identified as Marcelo Ventura, had never been mentioned before, but his name appeared on bank transfers made to accounts related to Camilla's family. Investigators suspected that he might have financed the erasure of Marina's identity, or even arranged for a new identity to be created for the child. When confronted, Marcelo denied everything, saying he did not remember Marina and that the transfers were just old business. But the coldness with which he reacted raised alarm bells. Camilla watched everything with growing anguish. She knew she was closer to the truth than ever, but she also understood that she was dealing with forces greater than she could have imagined. During a new search of the family farm, experts found a notebook buried under a false floor in the barn. It was an old diary, with handwritten passages, some smudged by time, but still legible. It belonged to Marina. In the pages, she described her growing fear of being watched. She mentioned strange conversations, people who appeared for no reason, and most importantly, her ex-boyfriend's insistence on getting back in touch, even after the breakup. She said she felt he wanted something more than just reconciliation. She wrote that, on several occasions, she found signs of a break-in in her house, and that she had the impression that someone was going through her daughter's things. One sentence in particular caught her attention. "If something happens to me, my daughter can't stay with him." It was a plea, a cry for help, stifled by omission and neglect. The contents of the diary were forwarded to the prosecutor's office as a key piece of evidence in the investigation. Based on this new evidence, the court issued a preventive arrest warrant against Camilla's father, now considered a fugitive. His name was added to national wanted lists, and the noose began to tighten. But the adoptive mother was still there. She remained at large, claiming innocence, presenting herself as the victim of a family breakdown. Even in the face of the evidence, her defense claimed that everything was the result of a revenge plan by Marina, who had forged documents and manipulated her daughter to destroy her life. It was an absurd allegation, but enough to delay any judicial decision. Meanwhile, Camilla was subjected to psychological evaluations, interviews with social workers, and countless hearings. Each day seemed like an emotional minefield, each memory an open scar. But she refused to back down. She wanted justice, not only for herself, but for a woman who tried to protect her until the end. During one of the interrogations, the adoptive mother let slip a previously unknown piece of information. She said that she didn't want to be part of it, but she was convinced that it was the best thing for the child. This statement sounded like a veiled confession. The investigator asked her to repeat it, but she backed down, saying that she was nervous and didn't know what she was saying. However, the recording was made. The content was added to the case file. With this, the prosecutor was able to request that the woman's telephone and tax records be broken. In the data, they found payments made to people linked to the businessman Marcelo Ventura, as well as financial transactions that were incompatible with her declared income. This was confirmation that there was financing behind everything. A network organized to cover up Marina's existence, hide Camilla's identity, and turn a heinous crime into a seemingly ordinary life. The repercussion reached a new level. The case was featured in major media outlets. Documentary filmmakers began to get closer to the story, and human rights defenders began to demand explanations from the authorities for having left this crime buried for so long. Camilla, now an adult, requested that the case be reopened in its entirety, including the analysis of old cases that had been archived without adequate investigation. The prosecutor's office accepted. The case was reclassified as aggravated kidnapping, ideological falsehood, and possible homicide. And then, a new element emerged. A genetic test performed on remains found at the site revealed DNA fragments compatible with Marina, but there was no body, only traces. This raised the possibility that she had been kept alive for a while before disappearing for good. The most likely scenario now was imprisonment followed by a concealed murder. The motivation, according to the prosecutors, involved a custody dispute, emotional revenge, and financial interests. Camilla was called to give another statement, this time in a public hearing. When she entered the room, she saw unfamiliar faces, reporters, lawyers, prosecutors, and in the background, her adoptive mother with a pale, expressionless face. For the first time, they looked at each other without words. Camilla spoke for almost 2 hours. She didn't stutter. She didn't tremble. She recalled every detail, every suspicion, every pain. She ended by saying, "I've been told my whole life who I should be. Today, I choose to discover who I really am, and I want the truth, no matter who it hurts, to finally come to light." The room went silent. It was impossible to pretend that nothing had happened. Faces lowered, voices fell silent. The weight of the truth hung over everyone. That night, after her testimony, Camilla did not return to the shelter. The prosecutor's office had arranged for a secure and confidential location, a precautionary measure in view of the imminent risk of reprisals. There was still one person directly involved in the plot who remained at large, the man she had believed to be her father all her life. Up until that moment, no one knew his whereabouts, nor were there any concrete clues as to his whereabouts. But the net was closing in. Anonymous information began to emerge. One of them claimed that he had been seen in a mountainous region in the interior of the state, living under a false name. The authorities organized discreet searches, trying to prevent the leaking of information that could alert him. Meanwhile, Camilla lived under constant surveillance, being accompanied by psychologists, prosecutors, and protection agents. Even surrounded by protocols, she felt the chill of fear running through her veins, not because she feared for her life, but because she feared that, once again, the truth would be buried before it was fully revealed. What distressed her most was not the absence of the man who raised her, nor the constant presence of the media trying to turn her pain into headlines. What hurt the most was the uncertainty about Marina. Despite everything that had been discovered, there was no definitive proof of her death, only fragments, traces, clues. The absence of a body left room for the impossible. What if Marina was alive? What if, somehow, she had been held captive for longer than anyone imagined? Hope was a double-edged sword. It was what kept her going, but it was also what tore her soul apart. Every time a new lead led nowhere, Even so, Camilla would not allow herself to give up. She began to study the case like a researcher. She read reports, compared dates, analyzed maps. She began to put together a detailed timeline, looking for gaps that might have gone unnoticed. And it was in one of these analyses that she found an almost imperceptible contradiction. The forensic report mentioned that one of the objects found at the site was a necklace with the inscription, "To my Marina, with eternal love." The detail that no one had noticed was that this same necklace appeared in one of the photos in the album recovered from the abandoned house, being worn by Marina. Apparently, this was clear proof that the necklace was hers. But Camilla noticed something strange. In the photo, the necklace's clasp was facing forward as if it were broken. However, in the forensic report, the necklace was intact. This difference, although subtle, suggested that there might have been two identical necklaces. Or worse, that the necklace found had been placed there intentionally as a way of associating Marina with the place. This possibility raised a new theory. What if part of the evidence had been planted to lead the police to a specific conclusion? What if someone wanted everyone to believe that Marina was dead even when she wasn't? Camilla took this suspicion to the prosecutor's office, who decided to re-examine the evidence from the site. During the new analysis, they discovered that the necklace had no traces of skin, hair, or sweat. No biological traces compatible with Marina. Only fingerprints from a third person who had not yet been identified. This reinforced the hypothesis that the scene had been manipulated. But why? What would be the point in faking Marina's death? There was only one logical answer: to protect someone who did not want to be found. Maybe Marina was alive, hiding not out of fear, but out of obligation. Maybe she had been forced to disappear. Maybe someone had threatened her daughter and she had given in. This idea completely changed the course of the investigation. The prosecutors began to work with the hypothesis that Marina was alive, in captivity, or on the run, and that her absence had been strategically planned by a network larger than previously imagined. During a search at the registry office in the city where Marina lived before her disappearance, an employee revealed that, years ago, a woman had tried to issue a new registration under a different name, claiming that she had lost documents. The woman said she was starting her life over after escaping an abusive relationship. At the time, he didn't pay any attention, but when he saw Marina's photo in recent news reports, he firmly stated that it was the same woman. The date of the attempted registration coincided with the period in which the investigation had been halted due to lack of evidence. It was as if Marina had tried to return to society, but had given up halfway through. The police cross-referenced the data and discovered that the name used by this woman appeared on a guest list at a remote inn, where she had stayed for 2 days. It was not much, but enough to rekindle hope. Camilla was informed of the new clue and this time asked to accompany the investigators. They went to the inn, which was located in a village almost forgotten by time, surrounded by mountains and with no access to main roads. The owner confirmed that a woman with the same registered name had stayed there, but no longer had her documents. However, he remembered that she carried a diary, wrote all the time, and seemed nervous. He also said that one night he heard her crying while talking to herself out loud. She repeated phrases like, "She needs to forget about me," and "I can't go back now." The impact of those words on Camilla was devastating. It was the first time she had heard a possible direct message from her mother, even through third parties. She needed to find that diary. The owner of the inn indicated that, after the woman left, a notebook was left in the room and thrown away. But an employee at the time had kept the object out of curiosity. The woman was found in another city. She said she had been intrigued by the notebook and had taken it home, but had never had the courage to open it. She handed the intact object over to the investigators. Camilla, with trembling hands, opened the cover and immediately recognized the handwriting. It was Marina. The pages were filled with fragments of thoughts, memories, and outbursts that outlined the trajectory of someone trying to survive guilt, fear, and longing. Marina wrote about her daughter with affection, but also with pain. On one of the pages, she said, "I was forced to disappear. I was threatened with her life. I did what I had to do to keep her alive." That confirmed everything. Marina had disappeared to protect Camilla. Someone had forced her to do it, and now perhaps she was still alive, somewhere, waiting for the right moment to return. The diary was sent for analysis and filing as official evidence. In light of everything, the prosecution decided to open a new line of investigation. Now, based on the hypothesis that Marina was alive and being kept silent, Camilla was now officially considered the victim of a double kidnapping. First, for having been taken from her mother. Then, for having been deceived about her entire story. But she no longer just wanted justice. She wanted to be reunited. She wanted to look into the eyes of the woman who gave her life and tell her that she had survived, despite everything. She wanted to hear from her own mouth the answers that the trials and investigations could not provide. The case, which began as a mystery about a teenager in danger, was now turning into one of the most shocking and complex stories the country had ever seen. And everything indicated that the most revealing chapter was yet to come.